Welcome to a special edition of the Rink Wide podcast. On this episode, we go through J-Pat's personal top players in Canucks history, broken down by position. Have a listen. Let us know if your list matches J-Pat's. You can always text us at the Great Clips inbox at 778-402-9680 or give us a follow on Twitter and Instagram at Rink Wide Podcast. All right, J-Pat, who you got on the list?
Lists are fun.
Yes.
And they're great talking points. And let's be clear, this is my list of the best Canucks all time by position. So this isn't going to be the top 20 Canucks of all time.
Yes.
It's being broken down by position. So I've got the top 5 goalies all time to wear a Canucks uniform. I've got the top 5 defensemen in my mind all time to suit up for the Vancouver Canucks. And then we expand the list and we'll get the top 10 forwards. So, again, this isn't 1 through 20. It is by position. And this is on me. If you don't like it, feel free. Because lists are great for this. Like, how can you have this guy at that? Where is this guy? He should be hired. This is mine. This is just my view. You, Andrew, are free to disagree. The listener, certainly free to disagree as well. We like feedback on our feedback channels, too. So you can come up with your own list. You can play along. Whatever the case, this is mine. You don't have to agree with it, but I will present it, and you can assess for yourself.
Okay, I got a couple questions, though.
Yeah.
Is there any sort of criteria here? Like, do you have to have a certain amount of games played?
No games played threshold. Is there a criteria? I guess for me, it's a personal account, and you will, I've been covering this team for 20 years, but born and raised in Vancouver. I've been around this franchise going way back to the late 70s. I was there in 82. I saw the 2 Stanley Cup final games for myself, saw the cup presented for the first time ever in Vancouver at Pacific Coliseum. It was the Islanders, wrong team, getting the cup that day. But
they won a few in a row.
They did. That was a pretty good Islanders team.
Yeah.
So this is just my thoughts, my version of sort of top 5, top 10 lists here.
Okay.
But no, there was no real signposts or yardage markers or anything that anybody had to pass to be included on this. And anybody was eligible. Like current players, obviously there's a lot of past players, but I took the current roster into account, and we'll see if any of them made the grade as I came up with my lists here.
Okay, so we're going to do 5 goalies, 5 defensemen, 10 forwards.
Yes.
Let's start between the pipes. Who are your top 5 goaltenders in Canucks history?
All right, well, just a little bit of backstory on the goaltenders. This has not been a position of strength historically for the Vancouver Canucks. And so I was working through this as I came up with the list here, and obviously there are some that are going to be crystal clear, but rounding out the list, I've got some honorable mentions that didn't make the top 5, and in no particular order. Dan Cluchey, and people can say, Dan Cluchey, how does he get honorable mention? Well, he certainly didn't make the top 5. He was the backstop during that West Coast Express era. A ton of regular season success. Obviously, playoffs was his downfall and the team's downfall. But I give Dan Cluchey honorable mention. Again, this is not a position of strength for the Vancouver Canucks historically over 50-plus years now of existence. Corey Schneider wasn't around long enough, but put up incredible numbers as he broke into the National Hockey League. In his time as a Canuck, he had a save percentage of .927. Mind you, he was playing behind the best team in franchise history. And body of work as a Canuck, there's not enough there to get onto the top 5 list. But when he was here, the short time he was here, you could see the signs of a starting goaltender in the National Hockey League. So he makes the honorable mention list as well. Gary Smith, going way back to the 70s, an expansion team that was trying to establish itself, a lot of long nights, but Gary Smith was a guy that showed up, played hard, competed, stopped a lot of pucks, and so wanted to give him a nod on the honorable mention list. And Glenn Hanlon in the early 80s as well, the Carrot. So those guys are on the honorable mention list. Number 5 on my list of top 5 Canuck goaltenders is Ryan Miller. And I think as time goes on, people are going to look back and recognize just how well he played for the Vancouver Canucks. He was signed to that 3-year deal, one of the first signings of Jim Benning taking over as general manager, wanted a veteran goaltender to provide sort of that stability at the most important position on the ice. And really, Ryan Miller did that. He was only here 3 years, but this guy provided goaltending behind a terrible defense. His first season was good. His first season was that playoff year when they faced the Calgary Flames. He had a .914 save percentage in his 3 seasons. And really, when you consider who was in front of him for the bulk of the time that Ryan Miller was in goal for the Vancouver Canucks, this guy was just a professional on the ice, off the ice. And he stuck up for Troy Stecher in Toronto, came to his defense when it looked like Matt Martin was going to put him in the backpack and run away and abduct Troy Stecher, if not beat him up. The other thing, too, Ryan Miller, short time here, he's 5th in shutouts all time on the Vancouver Canucks with the history of their goaltenders. So I think Ryan Miller has earned his spot in the top 5.
He's 7th in games played as well, 150 games played. And then, he had that good first year with the Canucks, of course. He was able to get 29 victories that year. I mean, they were better, obviously, than the previous seasons that he played there. But yeah, you're absolutely right. A .253 goals against average that year, had a solid save percentage in the short time that he was here with the Canucks. But like you mentioned, though, it's not really the most stellar list. And Ryan Miller, when you think about him, you probably think Buffalo Sabres more than you think Vancouver Canucks. But I'm quite pleased to see him on the list because I think he's an underrated goaltender in terms of his time in Vancouver.
4th on the list is Jacob Markstrom, and 2-time team MVP on a team that just bled shots. And, not that long ago, so people remember just how well he performed, really developed, ran with the opportunity to be a starting goaltender in the National Hockey League. 4th all-time in games played as a Canuck netminder. Unfortunately for him, he got stuck on 99 wins. He would have loved to have got that 100th goal or the 100th victory as a Vancouver Canuck. But Jacob Markstrom just was up to the occasion, developed into really, a solid, legitimate starter in the National Hockey League in his time as a Canuck, and he earned the contract that he got with the Calgary Flames. Priced himself out effectively of the Vancouver Canucks. They had Thatcher Demko, so they elected to move on from Jacob Markstrom. But Jacob Markstrom had some nights here that people are going to remember for a long, long time, especially given the way the Canucks played in front of him. I've got Jacob Markstrom 4th on my list of all-time Vancouver Canuck goaltenders.
Arguably should have been a Vezina finalist in the 2019-20 season, ended up being 4th in voting that year, was 10th in Vezina voting the year before that. Kind of took him a while before he became the real, solidified number 1 here in this town, but ended up an all-star his last season before heading to Calgary. Not going to quibble with that selection right there. What do you got at number 3?
Well, there's a common thread from the top 3. And you can probably guess who number 1 is, and you probably have a pretty good sense of who number 2 is. And so that leads us to number 3. It's King Richard Brodeur. And I think most people will think of Richard Brodeur as this sort of undersized guy that rose up and was heroic for the Canucks in their run to the 1982 Stanley Cup final. And maybe people think that's all Richard Brodeur did as a member of the Vancouver Canucks. But I think people forget he's 3rd in franchise games played and victories from the early 1980s, that he was here long enough to put up those kind of numbers. Certainly the run to the Cup final, the first one in franchise history, that's got a special spot in franchise lore, and he was such a big, big part of it. But it wasn't just that spring of 1982. He was here for a while. He played a lot of games and delivered for the Vancouver Canucks. So I think this is a pretty easy selection to slot the King in at number 3 all time on the Canucks list of goaltenders.
Spent a lot of his career in the WHA, but 9 seasons in the NHL. And if you take a look at his hockey reference page, you'll see a lot of bold numbers on there during his time with the Canucks. That means he was a league leader at that point. And when you get the nickname the King, I think you're doing something right. All right, who's at number 2?
Captain Kirk. We go from the King to Captain Kirk. Kirk Mclean, 516 games played. That's a franchise record for Vancouver Canuck goaltenders. Most saves in franchise history. He is 2nd in wins. And just like Richard Brodeur, you're always going to link Kirk Mclean to 1994 and the run and the save off Robert Reichel and the Calgary Flames. And without that save, maybe the Canucks don't get a chance to advance and get on the hot streak that they did all the way to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals. So Kirk Mclean certainly has his place in franchise history. He's got his name in the record books here with this organization. And up until the number one guy arrived on the scene, Kirk Mclean was it. I mean, he authored some of the best goaltending stories that we had ever seen from anybody in a Vancouver Canuck uniform. That changed in the spring of 2006 when the Canucks made a trade that would bring in the number one guy to town. But Kirk Mclean, absolutely up high on the list of all-time Vancouver Canuck goaltenders. He comes in at number 2.
Two-time All-Star, with the Canucks, was in Hart voting in the 91-92 season, was 4th in Hart voting, 2nd in Vezina voting that year, and as well in the 88-89 season, 3rd in Vezina. Could you imagine if Kirk Mclean was the Vezina Trophy winner for the Vancouver Canucks? Oh, so close, but not able to get it. Now, I know who's going to be number 1 because he shares the same number, as this position and as Kirk Mclean.
Yeah, Bobby Lou is number 1. And for me, and I've been on the beat and covered the Vancouver Canucks for 20 years and certainly all of Roberto Luongo's time as a member of the hockey club. And I just thought that he elevated the position. As good as Kirk Mclean and Richard Brodeur and others had been for the Vancouver Canucks, Roberto Luongo took goaltending to another level. And you think back to those first couple of seasons when the Twins hadn't become the players that ultimately they were going to be as leading men in the National Hockey League. Luongo's first couple of seasons, there wasn't much there. And he provided incredible goaltending, gave the Canucks a chance to win night in, night out, emerges as the franchise leader in victories, franchise leader in shutouts, and of course, he takes the Canucks to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final. Like Kirk Mclean, like Richard Brodeur, those Stanley Cup Finals didn't end well either for the Vancouver Canucks. And sure, I mean, that's going to go on his history. It's in the record books. Yep. We know that there were some issues with his performance, certainly in Boston in the Stanley Cup Final. But you think back to earlier rounds of the playoffs. You think of overtime in Game 7 against the Blackhawks when they absolutely had to win. The Blackhawk power play, the save coming across off Patrick Sharp. There were others there, the Nashville series, San Jose as well. All things considered, it didn't end necessarily the way that Roberto Luongo and the Vancouver Canucks wanted in the Stanley Cup Final. It didn't end the way that Roberto Luongo wanted in terms of his time with the Vancouver Canucks. But without a question, I think this was a pretty easy decision to slot Bobby Lou at number 1 on the list of all-time Vancouver Canuck goaltenders.
Finished in Vezina voting 3 times in the top 5, once in second, and arguably that year should have been the Vezina Trophy winner in 06-07, but pretty easy choice there at number 1 when it comes to the goaltenders in Roberto Luongo. My question to you, though, if they were to retire the number 1, do both names go up?
I don't think so. I don't think so. And that's with all due respect to Kirk Mclean, but as I said, in my mind, and Kirk did great things for the Vancouver Canucks, but I just think Roberto Luongo elevated the position, and certainly in those early years, just provided goaltending that the organization hadn't seen to that point. So it's a tough call, and I know that there are some that think absolutely that's the way it should go. Let's see when the organization makes that decision. If Luongo goes into the Hockey Hall of Fame, and I certainly think that he will, how do you have a guy who had his best seasons in your uniform go into the Hockey Hall of Fame, and you don't recognize that with all the other jerseys that are retired and hang in the rafters at Rogers Arena?
A pretty unique stat about Kirk Mclean, by the way, before we move on to the defenseman real quick. 21 assists in his career. Now, not all with the Vancouver Canucks, but quite interesting. 21 points for Kirk Mclean. Roberto Luongo had 10 as well. All right, let's move on to the defenseman. And I'm going to assume that all 5 of these guys had more than 21 points in their career with the Vancouver Canucks. But who you got kicking things off at number 5?
Well, again, I've got an honorable mention because you come up with these lists, and the first couple, like in the case of the goaltenders, the top 3 were easy, but then you sort of bat around a few ideas, and you can make convincing arguments that some of the guys that are on the outside deserve one of the last spots. So I've got an honorable mention for forwards as well. But for the defense, Kevin Bieksa, when you just think of what he meant to the organization through the best run in franchise history, on the ice, obviously a character guy off the ice, and scores the big goal that punches their ticket to the Stanley Cup Final, makes the stanchion a cult hero in this city. So I've got Kevin Bieksa in my honorable mention. Not enough there in his body of work to be one of the top 5 in my mind, but certainly in the discussion, he got some consideration, and I hope he's happy enough just to be mentioned. It's an honor just to be mentioned. That's why it's honorable mention.
Surprisingly enough, with Bieksa, close to 600 games with the Canucks, and I actually, when I look at his body of work, thought he played for the Ducks quite longer, but it's just 200 games with them there as well. Was in the Norris Trophy voting, that is, in twice. Made the top 25 once, top 20 another time at 18. And honestly, quite surprising when it comes to Kevin Bieksa. Not going to argue with that, though. Think he should be there at 5. Wonder, though, he makes your Ring of Honor, and your Ring of Honor, of course, includes 20 people, or different players, that is. Is he a Ring of Honor guy for the Canucks?
Yeah, I think eventually he probably is. I think that there's going to be a pecking order, and Alex Edler probably has to get in there first, but Edler's still playing, so let's see, whenever Eddie hangs them up, he'll get his chance to go up into the Ring of Honor, and from there, we'll see how many others on the 2011 team.
Yeah.
The Twins have had their jerseys retired. We talked about Luongo. We'll hear about Ryan Kessler a little bit later on here as we work our way through. Is there a spot there? I know he's a polarizing figure as well. I've got Kevin Bieksa on my honorable mention for the top 5 defensemen all time when it comes to the Vancouver Canucks. Ed Jovanovski is there as well. And it's funny, you mentioned Norris Trophy voting. When the Canucks acquired Ed Jovanovski in the Pavel Burr deal, he came with his advanced billing. He was the first overall pick in his draft year. And it was never just Ed Jovanovski. It was always future Norris Trophy winner Ed Jovanovski. And I just don't know that he ever fully reached his potential. I'm not sure I ever bought into this notion of him being a Norris Trophy winner. First overall pick for a reason. And there were nights when he was fully healthy. Injuries were a part of his story, certainly later in his career as well. Played both ends of the ice, was tough as nails, exciting player to watch, prone to the odd mistake in his own zone. Certainly not a perfect player, but a very good player for the Vancouver Canucks, but not good enough to get into my top 5. So Ed Jovanovski gets recognition here as part of the honorable mention, but couldn't crack the top 5.
Okay, well...
I got one other honorable mention that I want to throw out there.
All right.
And that's Sammy Shallow, who I just think criminally underrated in his time as a Canuck.
Okay.
Steel balls and everything else. Unfortunately, injuries. You just wonder where he could have been if he had been able to stay healthy and log a bunch more games. But you can't talk about Sammy Shallow without injuries. But when he was healthy, had the massive blast from the point and an absolute weapon. Certainly that big right-handed shot, a big part of the power play as the Canucks rolled through the playoffs in 2011. So I've got Sammy Shallow. I just don't think he ever got credit for his all-around game. And unfortunately, I think people think of Sammy Shallow and they think, yeah, but he was never in the lineup. And that's true. Injuries plagued him throughout his career. But, man, when he was healthy, he was a stud for the Vancouver Canucks.
So as I look at the point totals for all-time Canucks defensemen, I see Kevin Bieksa at 6, Sammy Shallow at 7, Ed Jovanovski at 8.
Mm-hmm.
I see the guys above him, but I'm wondering if that is going to be your 5. So let's hear it.
All right, I got Doug Lidster coming in at number 5. Doug Lidster holds the team's single-season points record by a defenseman with 63. That was back in the mid-1980s. Now, Quinn Hughes is bound to shatter that. I just think that we've already seen that in his limited time in the National Hockey League, that if he can play a full 82-game season, I think Quinn Hughes well on his way to 63+, and he'll probably break that number several times over. Doug Lidster is 5th in franchise scoring. He's not a guy that a lot of people talk about.
Yep.
One of only 5 defensemen to reach 300 points as a member of the Vancouver Canucks. He was named the team's top defenseman on 4 separate occasions. So there was never a lot of flash to his game, even for a guy that had 63 points. There wasn't much that was flashy with Doug Lidster. Of course, he returned as an assistant coach briefly under Willie Desjardins, but that's not why he is in my list. This is for things that he did while playing for the hockey club. And I just think when you look at his body of work, when you look at the fact that he has still a place in the franchise record book with that 63-point season as a defenseman, top defenseman 4 separate times, yeah, Doug Lidster, I think absolutely deserves a spot in the top 5. So I've got him coming in at number 5 on my list.
5th all-time in points amongst Canucks defensemen, but Here's a stat for you. Played 666 games. Oof. A little scary there.
Need that ominous organ music. Dun, dun, dun.
All right, who you got coming in at 4?
Well, I think a lot of times with lists like this, there's a recency bias. And people sometimes forget. I mean, they know that the Canucks played their first game in the fall of 1970. They have been around now for more than 5 decades. And so, even though I was in diapers when this guy was playing, I still think it's important to recognize guys that were here early on and sort of set the foundation for players that followed. So, there'd be a lot of listeners that are in their 20s, maybe in their 30s, that perhaps have heard the name, but they weren't around. They didn't see him play. But Dennis Kearns comes in at number 4 on my list of all-time Vancouver Canuck defensemen, tied for 3rd in points by a defenseman for his Canucks career. Still holds the franchise single-season record for assists in a season by a blue liner with 55. So we talked about Doug Lidster having 63 points. Dennis Kearns sets the mark with 55 assists again. I think Quinn Hughes will blow that out of the water. But Dennis Kearns and his 290 career assists are second in the franchise record book. And this guy played in the 1970s when the team was still trying to establish itself. So, there was Harold Snepps from those early Vancouver Canuck teams as well. He probably deserved a little bit of consideration just when you think of the pantheon of guys that played for the Canucks and played defense, but we didn't mention him in the honorable mention, and he didn't make the list. But Dennis Kearns does, and I think it's important to recognize different eras in franchise history. So most of the guys that have been on my list, and you look at the goaltenders, we had Richard Brodeur from the 1980s, but you have to go back even further to that first decade of existence, and hey, that's part of Canuck history. And Dennis Kearns was a part of it. So I've got Dennis Kearns coming in at number 4.
Dennis Kearns didn't debut with the Canucks until 26 years old as well. So
you're going to say 2016. I was going, Andrew,
yeah.
No.
Played his entire career, NHL career with the Canucks. 10 years with the Canucks. All right, who's coming in at number 3?
All right, so we will fast forward from the 70s to the 1990s, and we're going to go with Jyrki Lumme. I was waiting for you to say it with your finish.
Jyrki Lumme.
Thank you. Jyrki Lumme comes in at number 3, and it's fitting that he's tied for 3rd among Canuck defenseman scorers all time. He wasn't here as long as some guys, but he was here during an important stretch in franchise history, and that, of course, was the 1994 run to the Stanley Cup final. He was named Canucks top defender on 4 separate occasions like Doug Lidster, and there was a guy that just made it look easy. He sort of had that natural flow. I'm not talking about his hair, although he did have a little bit of a flow there as well.
Salad,
but just, his skating style was easy, made the game look pretty easy. And that's not a particularly simple thing to do when you're playing that position in the best league in the world. So I look at Jyrki Lumme and I think, yeah, absolutely. One of the top defensemen in franchise history. And so I've got him slotted in at number 3 on my list.
Played 579 games, 9 years with the Canucks, and as you mentioned, just an absolute figure piece of that 94 Cup run. And, of course, went on to play elsewhere around the league. But I think when you look at Jyrki Lumme, when you think about Jyrki Lumme, he's a Vancouver Canuck through and through. All right, number 2 now.
Yeah, and again, when you get to the top of these lists, I think it gets a lot easier. It's sort of lower on the list that the debate comes in. I don't think anybody would quibble with my selection of Mattias Ohlund as the second best defenseman in Vancouver Canuck history. 770 games played. That's second only to Alex Edler for guys at that position. You talk about your rock solid, steady, shutdown guy that could chip in with a little bit of offense. He has taken his rightful spot in the Ring of Honor, suffered that horrific eye accident that certainly slowed him down, but man, you have to give him a ton of credit for persevering and being able to stick with it and just continue his National Hockey League career. And obviously it didn't end with the Vancouver Canucks. He moved on to Tampa for a few more seasons. But when I just think of low-maintenance guys that showed up and battled, and I think of Mattias Ohlund and the number of nights in this division going head-to-head against Jerome Mcgillney, and I think they had a healthy respect for each other. But I also think there was an element of hate between those two guys. They just battled tooth and nail. And you think how many times the Canucks and Calgary played each other over the course of a season. And, every single time it was the Canucks and the Flames, you knew that Mattias Ohlund and Jarome Mcgillney were going to be locked up in front of the Canucks net, just battling it out. So a ton of years of service, great years of service, a Ring of Honor guy in the rink, and I've got Mattias Ohlund, number 2 on my personal, J-Pat's personal Ring of Honor here among Canuck defensemen.
Through his 11 seasons with the Canucks, averaged about 25 minutes of ice time, 24:59. And we'll remind the listeners as well, almost won the Calder, was second in Calder voting in his rookie year. He put up some points at times in his career, has a career high of 14 goals in a season. 35 points was his career high. It was his second year with the Canucks. But when you think of Mattias Ohlund, you don't think about points. You think about just a defensive stalwart back there. And, I like that pick.
Well, and you also think, too, and we'll talk about the Sedins a little bit later on, but people always talk about, the Sedins.
Did the Sedins make the list? They made the list.
They did, yeah. Spoiler alert.
Right.
But, no, you heard that an awful lot through their career about toughness. And toughness isn't dropping the gloves and fighting. Toughness is playing the best players on the other side, night in, night out, not taking a shift off. And Mattias Ohlund was that matchup guy for the Vancouver Canucks. It wasn't just Jarome Mcgillney. It was the best player on the other team.
And people feared him. I mean, he was that kind of guy, right? I mean, he put you through the boards, really.
He was tough. He was a tough customer. All right, to the top of the list here. No surprise. Flying high, it's the Eagle. Alex Edler, 925 games played as a Vancouver Canuck. Couldn't get that 100th goal in a Canuck uniform. Tops out at 99 goals, 310 assists, 409 points. Franchise leader in games played, goals, assists, and points by a defenseman. And just like we talked about with Mattias Ohlund, big minutes, matchup role. There was offense there. He had a 49-point season way back when, a guy that played in all situations. And really, when you think about value from the draft, I would suggest that Alex Edler might just be the best value the Canucks ever extracted from an NHL draft. You expect your first-round picks to be among the best players in franchise history. This guy was a third-rounder back in 2004, almost got to 1,000 games, over 400 points, and just a night-in, night-out guy that they leaned on and could rely on, and absolutely headed to the Ring of Honor. I don't think 23 is going up to the rafters, but there was a spot reserved in the Ring of Honor at Rogers Arena for Alex Edler, and that might be the second biggest honor he gets after being number 1 on J-Pat's personal Ring of Honor.
That one trumps them all. And, of course, a former Kelowna Rocket as well, Alex Edler. Great point or pick there at number 1. I wonder, though, and I'm asking you guys, the listener, do you push back on that? Because some people do. I have had the discussion with others about Alex Edler with the Ring of Honor, and there is an argument about retiring his number, but I'm not going to go that far.
I don't think there's a whole lot of discussion really to be had about the jersey retirement.
Nor do I. But he's a lock for the Ring of Honor. And if you disagree, well, I'm sorry, but you're wrong. All right, let's move on to the forwards now.
Well, just before we leave defensemen, were there any surprises? Did I miss anybody based on, you talked about the top 5 scorers in franchise history among defensemen. Did they all make my list?
They all did. Yes, they did.
Yeah.
So it's Edler 1. This is of the all-time scores. Edler 1, Ohlund 2, Lyrke Lume 3, Dennis Kearns, Douglas. Yeah, I mean,
it wasn't really done based on points, but I mean, that is the way that they fell in my list here, and certainly points played a role in it, but I also, tried to look at their defensive game and sort of where they stacked up in regards to some of the others, and those guys that I mentioned on the honorable mention as well, all terrific players, but I think that top 5 sort of set itself apart.
There is an argument perhaps from some old schoolers that might say, hey, where's Dave Babich? Where's Harold Schneps? I mean, at the same time,
this is the top 5 list. This is select.
Yeah, this is
company.
I don't think that. But I mean, Schneps is in the Ring of Honor, right? I mean, there's guys that are have been honored by the team. But yeah, you're absolutely right. This is a top 5. I mean, kind of surprised they didn't make your honorable mention list. I'm kind of surprised that Dan Hamhuis didn't get mentioned at all.
Yeah, I thought about him, but again, it's a limited list.
Yeah.
And, his point totals hold him back, but that wasn't what he was all about. He was just a stable, steady, show up every night, play hard
There are some, though,
Mm-hmm.
that are listening right now wondering, where's Quinn Hughes?
And he'll get there. I mean, these are the things. This is the thing about lists. They are evolving. This is a snapshot in time. I don't think his body of work is enough. 5 years from now, he's probably at number one. He's probably caught Alex Edler in terms of points. If he can have, a bunch of 60, 70-point seasons, he's going to hold all sorts of Canuck records when all is said and done. But I just think based on body of work, there are others that have put in the years of service ahead of Quinn Hughes to get onto this list.
I did notice that Jim Benning didn't make the list
No,
as well. 241 games as a Canuck, 70 points. But Willie Mitchell's a name that stands out as well. But no, I think you got it right. Okay, let's pivot now onto the forwards. Now we're gonna do 10 here.
Yes.
So we had 5 goaltenders, 5 defensemen. Here's J Pat's Ring of Honor up front, 10 forwards. Let's go with the honorable mentions first.
Yeah, and this is more difficult. Obviously, there are more forwards that have played for the Vancouver Canucks, so more fish in the sea, if you will. This might surprise some people. Alex Burrows gets an honorable mention.
Ooh.
Alex Burrows in the Ring of Honor. Obviously, one of the best stories to ever play for the organization, from his ECHL roots to being a top-line guy during the best era of Vancouver Canuck hockey. But when I look at Alex Burrows and his point totals, just not a spot for him. I think there are 10. I've got 10 ahead of him in terms of all-timers. But, if you're talking about fan favorites, maybe that's a different conversation. Again, this isn't a popularity poll. This is one guy's opinion, and you are free to disagree. But I've got Alex Burrows as my honorable mention, knocking on the door. I've got Cliff Ronning in that group as well. Local guy. Everybody loved Cliffy. Undersized, but rose up big for this organization, part of that 94 team. That's not a knock in any way that he didn't crack the top 10. This might surprise some people. All these years later, Cliff Ronning is still 4th in playoff scoring for the Vancouver Canucks. And obviously the run in 94 was a big part of that. And when the chips were down, Cliff Ronning came through for the hockey club. So I certainly think Cliff Ronning deserves some honorable mention, as does Tony Tanti. And I think Tony Tanti completely underappreciated in this market. Again, time goes on and people perhaps forget. Younger people hadn't seen Tony Tanti play. Maybe some haven't even heard that name. Tony Tanti sits 8th in scoring. And more than that, 6th all-time in goals scored by the Vancouver Canucks. Had a 45-goal season. Like, this guy knew how to put the puck
Had a 41 goal. Had 3 40-goal seasons as a Canuck. 39 one year as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, he was a terrific scorer and a good player, and close to making the top 10 here.
All right.
But not quite. But I wanted to salute him and certainly give him his recognition.
Okay, so let's start now at number 10.
All right. This is a guy that I think controversial is not the right word, but there are so many different opinions about his time in Vancouver, his role in all of this, his rightful spot on these types of lists. I've got Alex Mcgilney coming in at number 10 on my list of all-time Vancouver Canuck forwards. 308 points in 312 games during a tumultuous time in franchise history. Like, this is a guy that played under Tom Rennie and then Mike Keenan. Basically a point-a-game guy when the team wasn't very good. Mcgillney had a 55-goal, 107-point season in 1995-96. 55 goals and 107 points. He wasn't here long, but I think he made his mark, and I think absolutely is a top 10 guy in terms of forward talent that has put on a Vancouver Canuck uniform.
To me, he's the second most dynamic player to ever play for this team. Like, I'm putting him above the Sedins here. I'm sure you can figure out who I think the most dynamic is, and that's Pavel Burr. His points per game, Alex Mcgilney, well a member of the Canucks, just below Pavel Burr, who's over a point per game, 1.1. He's at 0.98 for points per game as a Canuck. I love that pick.
And that's what I'm saying. In a real downtime for the franchise, history shows that the Mike Keenan era was just complete chaos, and yet Mcgilney, certainly in his first year, one of the great seasons in Vancouver Canuck history.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I don't think you can leave him out. Injuries started to dog him a little bit he had that amazing first year, and then he had trouble staying healthy. And so had he played every game while he was here, like, who knows where his numbers would be, and he'd probably be up higher than 10th on this list, but not much doubt to me that, and I'm with you, like, just in terms of game-breaking ability and absolute flash and panache and not, all of that.
Yeah, not taking anything away from the Sedins. The Sedins are fantastic. Best two players to ever play, arguably for this team. But when it comes to just flash and dash, Pavel Burr was worth the price of admission every single night, and arguably so was Alex Mcgilney. Again, like you said, though, injuries kind of set back his career. That first season that you're talking about with the 55 goals as a Canuck, 107 points. But get this, though, still only 18th in Hart voting. So
really,
keep in mind what that era was like when it came to putting points up in the NHL. Okay, who's at number 9?
I've got Todd Bertuzzi at number 9. This one might...
Another controversial one.
Some people may roll their eyeballs a little bit. It didn't end well, and the team certainly didn't have postseason success.
Seems to be a theme here so far.
Yeah, there have been a few exits, and there will be a few more here on this list. But Bertuzzi, you just think what might have been.
Yeah.
It just feels like his time here was lost opportunity. I mean, that West Coast Express era was incredible. That line at its height was one of, if not the best lines in the National Hockey League, worth the price of admission almost every night out. And that's important. Like, the playoff success wasn't there, and that absolutely is a black mark against Bertuzzi and that era of Vancouver Canuck hockey. But for me, like, at his height, and I don't mean his stature, I just mean at the top of his game, to have those hands on that frame truly redefined what a power forward was in this market. And that 2002-2003 season, 46 goals. Flirted with a 50-goal season. 46 goals, 51 points, 51 assists, 97 points. Again, one of the great seasons in Vancouver Canuck history. I've got Todd Bertuzzi, despite all his shortcomings, despite March the 8th, 2004, and the way it all ended, I still got Bertuzzi at number 9 on this list.
That season you referenced there, 25 power play goals. So over half of his goals were on the PP that year. 7 of them were game winners. He was a first-team All-Star that year, and he was in the Hart Trophy voting. He finished 5th in Hart Trophy voting that year. Absolutely right. One of the phenomenal seasons in Canucks history from Todd Bertuzzi. And boy, that West Coast Express, what a line that was. It's too bad they didn't have the success in the playoffs. But Todd Bertuzzi, Marcus Naslund, and Brendan Morrison were lethal night in and night out. Okay, number 8.
Number 8 on my list is Thomas Gradin, a guy that is still prominent in the organization as a trusted voice for the front office and has a track record of unearthing a number of prospects that have gone on to help this hockey club. But he's not on this list because of his work as a scout, even though his work in that regard has been well regarded. This guy was a tremendous player and a real trailblazer. Really, when you think of the history of Swedes coming over and playing a leading role for the Vancouver Canuck organization, Thomas Gradin, 550 points in 613 career games. He was part of that Stanley Cup final team, and that's kind of been a theme through this list, whether it was goalies or defensemen. I think I was swayed by guys that played prominent roles on some of the best teams in franchise history. This is the other thing. You want guys that show up when the chips are down. 38 points in 38 career playoff games. And back-to-back 86-point seasons. Like, I don't think people recognize sort of how consistent he was, a little bit ahead of his time, because there weren't a ton of countrymen that were over here. And this was the era of the big bad Philadelphia Flyers, and it wasn't easy to go into some of these buildings. And he took a beating and just picked himself up, dusted himself off, kept on going, and kept on racking up points. And so Thomas Gradin, I'm not sure that he gets necessarily the respect that his career deserves, but hopefully he feels a little bit better getting some respect here as number 8 on my list of all-time Vancouver Canuck forward.
Played 8 years with the Canucks and then played just that one season as a Boston Bruin, 64 games that year, but went on to play basically 4 more seasons of hockey over in Sweden as well. And you referenced that cup run there. 17 games played, 19 points.
Yeah, better than a point a game.
In that playoff run there for Thomas Gradin. And, of course, we know what he's done as a scout for the team and continues to do for the Canucks to this day. Number 7 now.
Yeah, number 7. And I wrestled with this one and where was his rightful spot. I certainly think that there was a place in the top 10. It was just a question of how high. It is Ryan Kessler. And stop me if you've heard this before. It didn't end well in his time as a Vancouver Canuck. But you think of Ryan Kessler at his peak, absolute heart and soul guy, truly a thermometer of the team. Like you could just take the temperature of the Vancouver Canucks on the way that he was playing. And when he was going, look out, they were a handful. The only Selke winner in franchise history. Not a top 10 all-time scorer. He sits 12th on the all-time scoring list. So he's outside of the top 10 in terms of points, but I factor in his all-around game, that shutdown ability. He did have a 40-goal season, a 41-goal season, in fact, and a pair of 70-point seasons. So there were productive years for Ryan Kessler, certainly, but I just think of the role that he played, the way that he developed, and ultimately you need these kind of guys to have playoff success. In that series against the Nashville Predators, basically beat the Predators single-handedly, and that was Shea Weber and Ryan Suter. I mean, he drew that matchup and saw a ton of those guys, and they just didn't have an answer for him. He was that good in that playoff series and helped the Canucks move past the Predators and on to San Jose. So when I look at all of the players that have suited up for the Vancouver Canucks as forwards, I've got Ryan Kessler coming in at number 7 on my list.
4 times he was in the top 5 voting for the Selke Award, of course, taking it during that 2011 run to the Stanley Cup final. And in that year as well, 19 points in the playoffs that year. And then, of course, none bigger than the points he was racking up against Nashville. Again, one of those series that forever in Canucks lore will be referenced to Ryan Kessler. Okay, number 6 now.
All right, we're going back in time here. And here we go with the first of the jerseys that hang from the rafters at Rogers Arena. And he was the first to have his jersey retired, the Steamer. You talk about seasons. 1979, 1980, come on a trip down memory lane with me.
Where's the harp?
In 1979, 1980, Stan Smyl led the Canucks in goals, assists, points, and penalty minutes. That is not easy to do. And it speaks to the kind of player he was. Didn't back down from a battle, would drop the gloves if he had to, wasn't the biggest guy in the world, but absolutely understood the art of the body check and was just ferocious on the forecheck. 4th in games played, 5th in franchise scoring, and this guy sort of set the template, if you will, for what the Vancouver Canucks wanted from players in terms of their compete level and their hustle and their desire to win. 3-time team MVP and still working for the organization as a senior advisor to upper management. See him around the rink, one of the good guys. I got Stan Smyl coming in at number 6 on my list of all-time Vancouver Canuck forward.
We want to talk about good third-round picks as well, 40th overall in the 78 draft. And again, heart and soul Canuck. I mean, there's some that will quibble with the fact that 12 is in the rafters, but if you were there like you were, Jeff, I think, that stands up. And, old school Canuck fans, new school Canuck fans might look at the point totals and go, really, this guy's in your rafters? But he meant so much more than just putting up points. Heart and soul guy, as mentioned, for the Canucks. And honestly, I think he's a little low on your list at 6, but I still like the pick.
You've got the numbers in front. What was his single season best?
His single season best as a Canuck was 88 points, and that was in the 82-83 season.
88 points?
Yeah.
That's nothing to sneeze at.
Not bad, yeah. But, I mean, it falls off a little bit after that. Also, let's keep in mind, too, 88 points back then is
fair enough.
It could be, let's say, 60-something right now. So, but again, in that playoff run where they went to the Cup as well, point-a-game guy, 17 games played, had 18 points, 9-9. So, I mean, balanced from Stan Smyl there as well. And, like you said, though, I mean, this is a guy that just bleeds Canucks and still does to this day, much like Thomas Gradin.
All right, here we go. We're into the top 5. Now we're getting down to the good stuff. Another one that has his number up in the rafters, it is Marcus Naslund, the long-serving captain, part of the West Coast Express, a 3-time All-Star. He was a Ted Lindsay winner back in 2002, 2003. He is second in franchise goals scored and sits third in points behind the Sedins. There will be some that maybe would have him even higher on this list, but we'll get to the names that are ahead of him coming up here momentarily. But Marcus Naslund, absolutely, in my mind, without a doubt, a top 5 guy to ever play for the Vancouver Canucks. So I've got him coming in at number 5.
Yeah, hard to argue this pick here. I mean, Marcus Naslund, he comes in from the Canucks, and what was the trade as well? I'm kind of blank. Here
Alex Stoyanov.
That's right, Alex Stoyanov.
Yeah, I mean, the best trade in Canucks.
Yeah,
history.
so there you go. I mean, he comes in and, takes him a little bit to get going as a Canuck, has that 40-point season, 20 goals, but then just absolutely explodes, has seasons of 90, 104, 84 points, was good in the playoffs for the Canucks, and during their runs, of course, back in 2003, he had 14 points in 14 games there. Again, can't argue with this pick. Marcus Naslund at 5 on your top 10 forwards list, I think is about right.
Yeah, I mean, that year that he won the Ted Lindsay, he scared goaltenders. That wrist shot was lethal. And so Marcus Naslund, he makes the top 5. On to number 4. And this is the guy that always draws the attention when it comes to these lists. Where should he properly be slotted? Probably the most talented player the team has ever had. Certainly the most electrifying. Of course, I'm talking about the Russian rocket, Pavel Burr. And I wrestled with whether he should be a little bit higher here.
This is a tough one.
Yeah. But I didn't like the way it ended for him. I think a lot of Canuck fans feel the same way. The holdout, the trade demands, sort of the shroud of secrecy around his reasons for wanting out. His jersey's retired, but even that was complicated to make it happen and to get him back here to Vancouver for the ceremony. But you just think of the accomplishments and the speed, the skill, the combination of those two. His part in the 1994 Cup run, franchise record for goals in a season, has 3 of the 4 highest goal-scoring totals in a single season as a Vancouver Canucks, 60 twice and 51. But as we said, it was complicated with Pavel. It always was, but there is no doubt that he is one of the best players that this organization has ever seen, and unfortunately, it just had to end a little bit too soon on his terms. He wanted out because it could have been a whole lot of fun had he been able to stay healthy and stay here for a few more years.
How's this for a second season in the NHL? 60 goals, 50 assists.
Yeah, that'll work.
Led the league with 407 shots on goal that year. The shooting percentage of just under 15%. Of course, was a Calder Trophy winner, was a first-team All-Star here. It was in Hart voting, was top 15 one year as well. But, so you definitely have to look at the way things ended for Pavel Burr. Boy, you'd think that with a talent like that, he would be number 1, but the guys above him, we'll have to see. Oh, I think I know who 2 of them are at least.
Well, I think you can probably figure out all 3.
I think I can as well, but I might argue with some of it. But how about this though? And I know there was some weird sort of times back in '89, but a 6th round pick from the Canucks. Now there's all kinds of red tape on why
the game sheets.
Yes, and Russian hockey players and where they got drafted, but that is
they got them though
there. And there were some teams that didn't even know that they could draft him as well.
Well, there were a bunch that thought they couldn't, and the Canucks rolled the dice and were able to come up with those sheets, and that story is legendary now. And so you're right, when we talked about Alex Edler being one of the great draft picks, certainly Pavel Burr, to get him in the 6th round and have him show up and do what he did. No question that will go down as one of the great draft picks.
He's also got one of the greatest hockey cards of all time for
the rollerblades.
The rollerblades sitting on the beach. His rookie card, boy. I think I put that one in my spokes, though, at one point. It's probably worth a few $100 at this point.
Not anymore.
All right.
It's chewed up.
No, of course
spokes.
not. Yeah.
All right, so let's get to the top 3.
Yeah.
And I think people can probably deduce from the list to this point.
Yep.
I went with Trevor Linden as number 3, and I thought about Burr there, but again, when you're thinking of best players, it's not all about what he did on the ice. It sort of was the politics, and there weren't politics during Trevor Linden's playing. I mean, I guess there were with Mike Keenan, but obviously the politics came a little bit later for Trevor Linden and his exit as president. But arguably the most popular Canuck of all time. This guy was a scorer. He was a leader. longtime captain, face of the franchise, really the driving force of that 1994 Stanley Cup final team. And I'm not sure if people recognize that all these years later, he is still the franchise playoff scoring leader and also has played more playoff games than any other Vancouver Canuck. So it's been a while since anybody's really added to the playoff totals. Nobody of the current core is likely to pass Trevor Linden anytime soon, so those numbers will live on. But I just think overall body of work, what he meant to the franchise during his time as a player with 2 stints, obviously, got dealt away, came back, and was sort of that conduit that allowed the Sedins to take over the leadership role that they did and ultimately get the Canucks to within a game of winning the Cup final in 2011. So not much doubt that Trevor Linden is high on, I think, any of these lists. I've got him at number 3.
Am I wrong to say that Trevor Linden is like the modern day Stan Schmiel for Canuck fans?
No, I think there's certainly some parallels there.
It wasn't, again, Stan did have that 88-point season, but it gradually fell off as he went throughout his career. Trevor, the same thing. I believe his high water mark was 80 points in a season. He's up there in Selke voting as well, and almost won the Calder, was second in voting that year. But again, when you think of just heart and soul Canuck players, it's hard to argue him at 3. You could put him at 1, but we know who's coming up next.
Yeah, and it's always tough to separate these two. So many people looked at them as a single entity during their time as Vancouver Canucks, but the Sedins, the Twins, are at the top of the list. I've got Daniel slotted second, only because Henrik was the center, which arguably a tougher position, and he does have more points. So Henrik wins out, but in his own right, Daniel, first in franchise goals, second in points, 86 game-winning goals. He has a Ted Lindsay Award in 11 20-goal seasons. So there was consistency, there was productivity, and again, just, he and Henrik and their roles on the best team in franchise history, that 2011 team. And that's with all due respect to the groups in 82 and 94 that got to the Stanley Cup final. But I just think top to bottom, when you look at the all-around depth, I think that 2011 team, it was built to win the Stanley Cup. It should have won the Stanley Cup. It was the better team on paper, but the series was played on the ice, and they didn't get the job done. But Daniel and Henrik, and for all those things that we said about Matthias Olin, just every night matching up against the best players on the other side and finding a way, and the chemistry with Henrik as well. So I've got Daniel at number 2. And then you look at Henrik, leader in games played, leader in assists, leader in points, captain during the best era, a Hart Trophy winner. That 112-point season still stands as the franchise record. And for all those reasons, by the narrowest of margins. And it is tough to split the two. But I've got Henrik Sedin at number 1 on my list. Daniel Sedin comes in at number 2.
Daniel get robbed of that Hart Trophy in 2011?
Probably.
Yeah, I think so as well. Of course, falling to Corey Perry that year. 51 first-place votes for Daniel Sedin that year, but Corey Perry ultimately getting it. And that will be a debate for Canuck fans for years as they feel like Daniel got robbed. The listener here did not get robbed by this episode at all. A great list there. That is J-Pat's Ring of Honor. Would love to hear what you guys think, and why don't you tweet at us at Rinkwide Podcast. We'll get this up as well on Instagram. We'll put the list up there and get some of your comments as well. So follow us on Twitter and on Instagram at Rinkwide Podcast. J-Pat, that was fun. We'll have to do this again in some different form. But for your list, I can't really argue with it too much.
That's the first.
I do like Pavel Burr. For some reason, to me, Pavel Burr just seems like should be number 1, but he's just, I know that every Canuck fan is going to argue that.
And everybody will come at these things differently. Like, if the list was the most exciting player, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
But if we're talking about greatest, I think you have to take full body of work. I think you have to take longevity into account. And I do think that the way things end, if a guy doesn't want to be part of the organization, that's a factor. It works against him as well. So what I'd love to hear from some of the listeners, and you gave out the feedback channels there, is, we had the list. Obviously, there were 5 goalies, 5 defensemen, 10 forwards. There were a handful of others with honorable mentions. I wonder if there are people out there that think I absolutely flat out missed somebody. There were names that you thought for sure as you sat and listened and thought, okay, well, he wasn't 6 or 7. He's going to be, no. Was there somebody that was completely overlooked? Because I put in some time. I think I did my homework here. I didn't feel like I missed anybody. But again, that's what lists are great. Like, they're totally subjective, and you're well within your right to disagree. There isn't a right or wrong answer. This was my list of the best Canucks of all time by position, and we just hope that people had some fun sort of playing along at home as we unveiled this list.
Just got a text from John Shorthouse wondering why John Garrett didn't make your top 5 list of goaltenders.
Well, as we said, 5 goaltenders. We narrowed the field there. If we were going with top 5 color commentators of all time,
absolutely,
without a doubt. Top 5 diets, I'm not sure that he makes that list.
Not so much. Thanks for listening, everybody. And of course, this has been another edition of Rink Wide, the show that always scores.